In the middle of the night, July 29th, 1991, a Fort Bragg soldier walks home alone after a date with a possible romantic partner. But on the walk, he decided to indulge on one of his character traits. Tonight, he was going to walk through the Heather Ridge apartments and find an apartment to peep on. As he was walking through, he sees a ground floor sliding glass window, and there lying asleep on the couch was 19-year-old Crystal Hudson. What happens next is sure to shock you. Stay tuned. Phillip Wilkinson was a soldier stationed at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. But on the night of July 29th, 1991, he would become a monster. After a date with a woman that was, quote, flirtatious and leading him on did not go further as he expected, he decided that he was going to go to her apartment and, if it came to it, quote, rape her. He parked his car some distance away from her place and proceeded to the property. But then he started to hear the victim's dog barking. He decided he was detected and decided to abort his plan. But this didn't satisfy him. On his way home from her property to the barracks, he decided that he was going to walk around the known as Heather Ridge apartments and start peeping. Though after the recent events and failed sexual attempts, he stated that he had, quote, rape on his mind. While walking around, he noticed a sliding glass door with the light from a TV shining through it. He approached, and while he came to the door, he saw 19-year-old Crystal Hudson asleep on the couch. He says that watching her was, quote, getting him all worked up. He grabbed a nearby bowling pin and proceeded to break in. In an interview with Wilkinson, he states that he wasn't wanting to hurt anybody, but because he had the bowling pin in his hand, he knew that he was going to kill her. He entered undetected, and as he watched Crystal sleep, he fondled her and rubbed his hand along her thigh and buttocks. She awakens, but before she could scream, he starts, quote, bopping her on the head about 70 times with the bowling pin until she lay lifeless on the couch. After the brutal bludgeoning, he bit her breast and began to perform oral sex on her. He didn't vaginally penetrate her on account of him not being able to get it up. While caught up in the moment, a thought crosses his mind. Maybe there are others in the house. Maybe she has a boyfriend in the bedroom, or maybe she's married. He quickly grabs his bowling pin and begins to search the rest of the house. In the bedroom, he states he saw another woman and a boy asleep. He rapidly approached, and without thought or hesitation, he started to beat 38-year-old Judy Hudson, an employee of the nearby food line who was recently divorced. He hit her at least 8 times before moving on to her 11-year-old son, Larry Hudson, who he bludgeoned at least 5 times. They both lay lifeless in the bed, bloody and silent. Wilkinson told police that they didn't even make a sound. Now, this case is already brutal, bloody, and disturbing, but Wilkinson decides to take things a step further. He looks and he sees a nearby lamp. He reaches out and removes the light bulb from it, and with this light bulb, he proceeds to vaginally penetrate the Hudson women, one after the other. He told investigators that, quote, I was just going back and forth between the chicks, while engaging in sexual acts with their lifeless bodies. As if the murders of the family weren't depraved enough, he started to play with their bodies of this family, showing no respect for their being, and especially no respect for the women, fulfilling sexual fantasies at his own will as if they were dolls. Dolls that he had just brutally murdered with a bowling pin. When he was finished with defiling the corpses of the recently slain family, he knew that he had to do something. The only thing that he could think of so he didn't have to, quote, pay the price, was to go AWOL. To achieve this, he decides he needs to try and find some money. So he begins rummaging through the apartment, finding 2 purses on the table. He dumps the contents out and steals a cigarette lighter, a cigarette, and a single dollar bill. He rushes out of the house and gets back to his car. But it's not over here. He remembers that he left the murder weapon and the light bulb he sexually violated with inside of the apartment. In attempts to cover his tracks, he enters a second time, retrieving the items. He also wipes fingerprints from a faucet he washed his hands in and from the screen door. It is reported that he returned to the barracks around 4 a.m., and the next day he did not show up. The command team then reported him AWOL. Now, I was not able to find any information in my hours and hours of research as to where he went while he was AWOL, but he obviously had time to think. The guilt must have set in, or he knew he'd eventually get caught, and he decided to turn himself in. On January 9th, 1992, Wilkinson turned himself in to the Fayetteville Police Department. He waived his rights, and he gave a recorded confession in regard to the Hudson murders. He even agreed to give a bite mark, saliva, blood, and hair for DNA testing to concretely tie him to the murders. The court proceedings took place on September 15, 1994, with a jury recommending and the judge imposing the death penalty for each murder conviction. Subsequent appeals, including a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, were denied, affirming the original sentences. The appeal documents and hearings were lengthy, so I'll brief them now, but we'll go into this in a bonus segment at a later date, as there are many interesting points made as to his competence and motive. During these attempts of appeal, Wilkinson's brother and sister testified that he was a caring, loving person, that he was an alcoholic, and that the murders were grossly out of character for him. Many psychological exams were also done. A psychiatrist took the stand saying that he had interviewed Wilkinson 3 times in April, and in those interviews, he said that he found Wilkinson was suffering from depression, but that did not keep him from making rational decisions or from knowing his options. 2 other expert witnesses, Dr. Janet Vogelsong, a psychotherapist, and Dr. Stivian Alexander, a forensic criminal psychologist, testified that Wilkinson definitely knew that what he had done was wrong, and that he tends to exaggerate his childhood problems, and he relies on alcohol to cope. He suffers from compulsive voyeurism, or peeping, and that he has average or slightly above average intelligence. They also testified that although he is a, quote, disturbed individual and at high risk to engage in criminal behavior because of his mother's extreme religious views, neglect in his drinking, and lack of coping skills, that the defendant has no diagnosed mental disease, no mental illness or mental defect. The defendants continued to try and play off the fact that the defendant's childhood was marked by poverty, paternal abandonment, and maternal neglect, that the defendant was obsessed with sin, heaven, and hell, having been raised by his mother, who was an avid member of the Pentecostal church. As of the latest available information, Wilkinson remains on death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. There is no public record of successful rehabilitation efforts, and he continues to pose a potential threat, underscoring the gravity of his offenses. And by no means has he been a model inmate. As of recent of 2018, he was found tampering with locks and disobeying the guards and even interfering with them. Now, going into this is a thought process here, and this is just speculation, but it seems that this was a purely selfish act of sexual nature and anger in response to not getting his way with his previous date. The fact that he stated he knew he would kill her while he picked up the bowling pin, but also saying that he didn't mean to hurt anyone, seems like a load of shit to me. Another point is that he obviously knew that what he did was wrong because he tried to cover up his tracks. To me, this was a premeditated crime with multiple violations and should be held as such. It was a man who got denied, got mad, and murdered and raped a family, knowingly tried to cover his tracks, and proceeded to flee like a fucking coward. The case of Philip Edward Wilkinson serves as a grim reminder of the depths of human depravity. It highlights the necessity for vigilant mental health assessments and proactive community interventions to prevent similar tragedies. The legal system's response underscores society's demand for justice in the face of imaginable crimes. Now, Interestingly enough, this case brought attention to another unsolved murder from Colorado Springs. Well, triple homicide, that is, such as this one. In his confession, Wilkinson told something that caught their attention. He said that he had been peeking into people's windows for years, and that his habit began in Colorado Springs when he was stationed at Fort Carson in early 1985. This timeline places him in Colorado Springs around the time of February 14th, 1985, where Cassandra Rundle and her 2 children, Dietrich and Melanie, were murdered. It's known as the Lonely Hearts murders, and there are many parallels between these 2 cases, and this led her late father, Richard G. Rundle, to think Wilkinson was overlooked in the investigation of the murders of his daughter and 2 grandchildren. Nothing has come from this, and more as this unfolds. If you try to find these apartments, you won't find them known as the Heather Ridge. They are known now as the Hudson Apartments. If you have any information on cases or interest in subscribing for interviews, more in-depth analysis on cases, let us know. Share this podcast, follow us on social media, and tell your friends. As always, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Stay safe, stay alert, stay alive. This is Fatalville.